Welcome to Behind Closed Door, the place where some mysteries refuse to stay buried. And today we are reopening one of the most haunting, controversial, and emotionally difficult cold cases in modern American history, the 1996 murder of 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey. Before we begin, remember this story is not just a mystery, not just a headline, and not just a case file. At the center of it was a little girl with a name, a family, a childhood, and a life that ended far too soon. This episode is told with respect for JonBenét and with caution around every theory. Because decades later, no one has been convicted, the case remains open, and the truth is still locked behind unanswered questions. On the morning after Christmas, December 26, 1996, Boulder, Colorado woke up to what first appeared to be a kidnapping. In an affluent neighborhood, inside a large family home decorated for the holidays, Patsy Ramsey said she found a long handwritten ransom note on a staircase. Her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét, was missing from her bedroom. The note demanded $118,000. That number was strangely close to the amount of John Ramsey's recent work bonus. The wording was dramatic, the length was unusual, and the tone did not sound like the brief, direct message most investigators expected from a real kidnapping demand. To understand why this case gripped America so tightly, we have to understand the setting. Boulder in 1996 was not imagined by most people as a place for a crime like this. It was quiet, educated, affluent, and wrapped in the kind of holiday calm that makes danger feel distant. That contrast became part of the fear. If a child could disappear inside her own home after Christmas, then safety itself suddenly felt negotiable. At 5:52 in the morning, Patsy called 911. Her voice was frantic. Police arrived within minutes. The home was searched, but not in the way a modern crime scene unit would later wish it had been. Friends and family were called over. People moved through rooms. The house, which should have been locked down as a possible crime scene, became crowded, and that first decision, that first morning of confusion, would haunt the investigation for decades. The Ramsey home was large enough to become a puzzle of its own. Rooms, staircases, basement spaces, storage areas, and holiday clutter created a physical environment where investigators later had to ask uncomfortable questions. Who knew the layout? Who could move quietly? Who would know where to go? And how could a child vanish from a bedroom while the rest of the household slept? If you are already feeling the weight of this case, hit like and subscribe to Cold Case Vault. Because this is exactly why we reopen cold cases. Not to sensationalize tragedy, but to study the evidence, the mistakes, and the questions that never stopped echoing. Hours passed. The ransom note demanded that the family wait for a call, but no real call came. Then, around early afternoon, Detective Linda Arndt asked John Ramsey and a family friend to search the house again from top to bottom. Looking for anything unusual, John went down into the basement, into a lesser-used area of the home, and opened a door. Inside, he found JonBenét. The ransom note deserves a careful pause. In many kidnappings, notes are brief because the offender wants to minimize risk. Here, the note read like a performance. It warned the family, threatened consequences, and gave instructions with an oddly theatrical rhythm. The writer seemed to want control not only of the family, but of the story itself. The child who had been reported kidnapped had never left the house. The amount of the demand became famous because it felt too specific. $118,000 was not a round number. It was not a random million-dollar fantasy. It was close enough to John Ramsey's reported bonus that investigators and viewers alike wondered whether the writer knew private family information, or whether the number had another meaning entirely. That discovery changed everything. The case was no longer a kidnapping. It was a homicide inside the family home. A ransom note had been left upstairs, but the victim was downstairs. There were signs that confused investigators, evidence that could support more than one interpretation, and a scene that had already been touched, entered, and altered by panic and grief before forensic procedures could fully protect it. The first great mystery was the ransom note. It was not a few lines. It was more than 2 pages long. It was written on paper from inside the Ramsey house, apparently with a pen from inside the house. The writer claimed to represent a foreign faction, used dramatic language, and demanded exactly $118,000. For investigators, The note raised a chilling question. If an intruder had entered the home, why would that person spend so much time writing a long letter at the scene? Why use materials from inside the house? Why leave a kidnapping note if the child was never removed from the home? The 911 call also became part of the public debate. People listened to tone, wording, breathing, background sounds, and the final seconds after Patsy believed the call had ended. But audio interpretation can be dangerous. Panic does not sound the same in every person. Grief does not perform on command. Still, in a case starved for certainty, even a phone call became a battleground. But the opposite question was just as difficult. If someone inside the house wrote the note after the crime, how did unknown DNA later become part of the conversation? How do you explain the reports of possible entry points, the basement window, the suitcase, and the theory that someone had been hiding in the home during the family's Christmas night outing? This case does not become famous because one answer is obvious. It becomes famous because every answer seems to create another problem. JonBenét had been a child beauty pageant participant. In the media, that became a giant spotlight. Television crews replayed pageant footage. Newspapers and talk shows turned a 6-year-old's image into national debate. Some people questioned the pageant culture. Others argued that focusing on it distracted the public from the actual evidence. Either way, once the media took hold, the case became more than an investigation. It became an American obsession. One of the painful facts about this investigation is that the house filled with well-meaning people at the worst possible time. Friends came to comfort the family. Officers tried to manage an unfolding emergency. But every additional person increased the risk of contamination. In a cold case, a footprint, a fingerprint, a fiber, or a trace of DNA can matter years later. On that morning, the future value of those tiny traces was not fully protected. And when a case becomes an obsession, truth can get buried under noise. The second great mystery was the crime scene. Early reports and later analysis focused on the lack of clear forced entry. Some investigators leaned toward the idea that the scene may have been staged. Others, including retired detective Lou Smith, argued strongly for an intruder theory. Smith pointed toward the basement window, the possible use of a suitcase as a step, and evidence he believed suggested someone from outside the family had entered the home. Critics pushed back, noting cobwebs, dust, and other details that made the window theory controversial. When John Ramsey found his daughter, he did what many parents might do in a moment of horror: he moved her. From a human perspective, that action is understandable. From a forensic perspective, it was devastating. That is the tragedy of crime scenes. The instinct of love can collide with the needs of evidence. This is where the Ramsey case becomes a maze. One investigator sees a staged kidnapping. Another sees a botched investigation that ignored an intruder. One expert sees handwriting clues. Another says handwriting evidence cannot convict anyone. One side says there was no clear forced entry. Another says a wealthy home at Christmas does not need a dramatic break-in if doors or windows were not fully secured. So what happened inside that house after the Ramsey family returned from a Christmas gathering? That is the question at the center of the vault. The autopsy confirmed that JonBenét had suffered fatal injuries. But for this voice script we will avoid graphic description. The important point is that investigators were dealing with a homicide, not a missing child case. And the method of death raised questions about timing, staging, and intent. According to John Ramsey's later accounts, the family came home late on Christmas night. JonBenét was asleep, and he carried her or helped get her to bed. The household settled in for the night. By morning, the note was found and the nightmare began. The home was large, with multiple rooms, levels, and storage areas. In such a house, a person might move unnoticed for some time. But the same size and complexity also made the initial search more difficult and the later reconstruction more complicated. Let us slow down here, because this is where many true crime retellings become careless. There are several theories, but a theory is not a conviction. The Ramsey family lived under suspicion for years, yet no charges were ever filed against them. In 2008, Boulder County District Attorney Mary Lacey publicly stated that new DNA evidence had led her office to clear the Ramsey family in her view. Though later prosecutors and investigators have treated the case more cautiously, saying the investigation remains open and evidence still matters. That distinction is important. Public opinion is not proof. Suspicion is not proof. And in a case involving a murdered child, careless certainty can become another kind of harm. The media turned the case into a national theater. Cameras gathered outside. Experts appeared on television. Leaks shaped narratives. People who had never entered the house became certain they knew what happened. In that environment, evidence had to compete with emotion. And emotion often won. Still, the questions remain. Why was the note so long? Why did it mention a ransom amount so close to John's bonus? Why was the body found inside the house? Why was the initial scene not fully preserved? Why did so many interpretations split so sharply between family involvement theories and intruder theories? If you are watching this as a true crime viewer, comment below which part you find most puzzling: the ransom note, the basement discovery, the DNA evidence, or the early police response. And subscribe to Cold Case Vault, because in this episode, every small detail changes the shape of the mystery. Patsy Ramsey was heavily scrutinized because of the note and because mothers in high-profile child homicide cases often receive harsh public judgment. Some investigators believed aspects of the evidence pointed toward her. Others rejected that conclusion. Patsy maintained her innocence until her death in 2006. That fact matters because suspicion followed her for the rest of her life without a courtroom verdict proving guilt. Part 1 of this story is the morning of confusion. Part 2 is the investigation that began to fracture almost immediately. Once JonBenét was found, the Boulder Police Department faced a nightmare scenario: a child homicide inside a home, a family at the center of national attention, a ransom note that looked unlike almost anything investigators had seen, and a crime scene already compromised by the natural reactions of terrified parents and the procedural mistakes of first responders. John Ramsey also lived under the shadow of public suspicion while continuing to ask for additional testing. His position has been consistent in later years. He believes DNA and outside laboratory review may help identify an intruder. Whether that belief becomes a breakthrough depends on evidence, not hope alone. The police initially focused heavily on the family. That is not unusual. In child homicide cases inside a home, investigators often look first at those closest to the victim. They examine timelines, access, behavior, and the possibility of staging. To some investigators, the lack of obvious forced entry and the strange note seemed to point inward. But that focus became controversial. Critics would later argue that the police developed tunnel vision too early. Supporters of the intruder theory argued that outside possibilities were not given enough attention in the first crucial days. The Ramsey family, meanwhile, hired attorneys and public relations support. To the public, this looked suspicious. To the family, it was self-protection in a media storm where they believed they were being judged before evidence was complete. Both realities can exist at once. A grieving family can act defensively because they fear being wrongly accused. Investigators can view defensive behavior as resistance. And the public can misunderstand both sides because television turns nuance into conflict. Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's brother, was a child at the time. Over the years, public theories dragged his name into the spotlight in ways that raised ethical concerns. It is essential to say clearly, speculation about a child, without charges or proof, is not justice. It is one of the darker byproducts of media obsession. Then came the handwriting debate. The ransom note became the case's most famous artifact. Experts examined the writing. Investigators collected samples. Patsy Ramsey's handwriting came under intense scrutiny. Some experts could not eliminate her. Some suggested similarities. Others did not identify her as the writer. Later, a federal judge noted that several certified experts had not concluded Patsy wrote the note. That is the problem with handwriting evidence in a case like this. It can raise suspicion. But it is rarely the clean answer people want it to be. And the note itself was strange in another way. It seemed to borrow the language of movies, threats, dramatic instructions, references that sounded more like a thriller script than a criminal demand. Was that because the writer was staging a kidnapping? Was it because the writer was an unstable outsider inspired by pop culture? Was it because the writer wanted to confuse investigators? Every interpretation opens a door, and behind each door is another hallway. The grand jury documents added fuel because they seemed to say two things at once. There was concern about the parents. But prosecutors did not believe they could prove a case. That tension is why the public still argues. But in law, what can be suspected and what can be proven are not the same thing. By now, the story had become national. JonBenét's pageant photos were everywhere. The contrast was irresistible to television producers: a wealthy family, a beautiful child, Christmas night, a ransom note, a basement, and a mystery with no arrest. But true crime creators must be honest here. Media coverage did not only report the case. It shaped the case. It influenced public perception, pressured investigators, and created a permanent cloud around people who had not been convicted of anything. This is one of the core lessons of the JonBenét Ramsey case. Once a homicide becomes entertainment, the search for truth can become distorted. DNA changed the emotional direction of the case. To many people, unidentified male DNA suggested the possibility of an intruder. But forensic experts are cautious. The presence of DNA must be interpreted through collection methods, contamination risk, sample quality, and context. A profile can be important without being instantly conclusive. The grand jury chapter deepened the controversy. In 1999, a Colorado grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges related to child abuse resulting in death and alleged assistance to a person who committed the crime. But the district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, declined to sign the indictment, saying there was not enough evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Years later, when those documents became public, they reignited public debate. To some, the grand jury decision suggested investigators had stronger concerns about the parents than the public knew. To others, the prosecutor's refusal showed the evidence was too weak and too contradictory to justify charges. In criminal justice, that gap matters. A grand jury can find probable cause. A trial requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The Ramsey case has lived in that gap for almost 30 years. The intruder theory is compelling because it gives the case an external villain. It explains why the family might have been victims of a stranger or someone loosely connected to them. But it also asks us to believe an intruder remained in the house long enough to write or place an elaborate note and leave without a clean trail. That is why the theory has supporters and critics. Then there was DNA. DNA evidence became one of the most important and most contested aspects of the case. Male DNA that did not match the family was found on JonBenét's clothing. Supporters of the intruder theory saw this as a crucial sign of an unknown male. Skeptics argued that the amount, location, transfer possibility, and interpretation of the DNA needed careful context. Modern forensic science can be powerful, but it is not magic. Touch DNA, mixed samples, degraded evidence, and contamination risks can complicate even the most hopeful leads. Still, DNA remains the most promising path forward. Boulder Police have repeatedly said the investigation is ongoing and that they continue to work with DNA experts and law enforcement partners. In recent updates, the department said detectives had conducted new interviews, re-interviewed individuals based on tips, collected new evidence, and tested or retested other evidence to generate new leads. That means the case is not frozen in 1996. It is still moving, even if slowly. The inside-the-house theories are compelling because they explain the note as staging and the body remaining in the home. But they also must explain the unknown DNA, the absence of a confession, the lack of a prosecutable timeline, and the fact that decades of investigation did not produce charges. That is why certainty is dangerous here. If this kind of careful evidence-based storytelling matters to you, please like this video and share it with someone who follows unsolved mysteries. Every share helps keep attention on cold cases where someone, somewhere, may still know something. Now we reach the intruder theory, one of the most debated theories in the case. Lou Smith, a respected detective, became convinced the Ramsey family was not responsible. He believed an intruder entered the home, possibly through the basement window, waited while the family returned, attacked JonBenét, and left behind the unusual note. He pointed to marks he believed could indicate a stun gun, the broken window area, and unexplained items such as rope and other evidence that some said did not belong to the family. A good true crime episode does not need to shout. The facts are already loud enough. A child was killed. The first hours were flawed. The note was strange. The evidence was complicated. The case became a national obsession, and the person responsible has not been held accountable in court. The theory has emotional power because it explains unknown DNA and gives a path for an outside offender. But critics argue it also has problems. Why write such a long note inside the house? Why leave the body behind if the plan was kidnapping? Why risk staying inside a large home with a family present? Why was there not clearer evidence of entry or exit? Now consider the family involvement theories. These theories attempt to explain the note as staging, the body remaining inside the house, and the lack of forced entry. But they also have serious problems. What exact sequence would explain the physical evidence? The timeline, the 911 call, the emotional behavior, the lack of a confession, the unknown male DNA, and the absence of a successful prosecution? Over the years, different theories targeted different family members or different accidental scenarios. But none became a proven legal case. And without proof, repeating a theory as fact is not investigation. It is accusation. There is a reason this case continues to attract documentaries, books, interviews, podcasts, and online debates. It sits at the intersection of fear and ambiguity. It asks whether a monster came from outside, whether something terrible happened inside, or whether early investigative mistakes made the truth almost unreachable. This is why Cold Case Vault does not declare a killer here. We study the structure of the mystery. The structure is this. A child is reported missing. A ransom note is found. The ransom amount is suspiciously specific. Police arrive. The home becomes crowded. A full protective crime scene lockdown does not happen. Hours later, the father finds the child in the basement. The investigation splits between inside and outside theories. DNA later complicates the narrative. Media coverage turns the family into symbols. The case remains unsolved. For creators working in the American YouTube market, this case must be handled with discipline. Avoid shocking images. Avoid accusing living people without proof. Focus on timeline, evidence, contradictions, and official updates. That is how a true crime channel can be gripping without becoming reckless. Part 3 of this story is the legacy. What the case changed, what it revealed, and why it still refuses to close. The JonBenét Ramsey case exposed the tension between police work and public spectacle. Boulder was not a city used to this type of homicide. The case demanded the kind of immediate, disciplined, homicide scene response that many departments only perfect after repeated exposure to violent crime. The first officers had to respond to what they believed was a kidnapping, not a confirmed murder. But once the body was found inside the home, every earlier movement, every visitor, every object touched, every room entered became part of a permanent forensic problem. The modern audience is smarter than the old tabloid model assumed. Viewers do not only want horror, they want context. They want to understand forensic limits, media bias, police procedure, and the human cost of unsolved cases. That is why this story still works as a long-form documentary voiceover when told with restraint. That is one reason the case still fascinates investigators. It is not only about who killed JonBenét. It is about how early decisions can shape the entire future of a case. In later years, John Ramsey continued calling for more DNA testing and outside review. The Boulder Police Department has pushed back against claims that it is ignoring viable evidence, stating that the case remains a top priority and that investigators continue to work with DNA experts. That public tension between the family and investigators has become part of the story. But beneath that tension is a shared reality. The case needs evidence strong enough to identify, charge, and convict the person responsible. Imagine the psychological pressure on investigators. Every decision was watched. Every mistake was amplified. Every theory had believers ready to attack the opposite side. In a smaller case, investigators can work quietly. In this case, the whole country seemed to be standing inside the evidence room. And that has not happened. There have been suspects over the years. One of the most infamous was John Mark Carr, who confessed in 2006, creating a media frenzy, but his DNA did not match evidence from the scene. And he was not charged. That episode showed how dangerous false confessions can be in famous cases. Some people confess because they want attention. Some are mentally unstable. Some insert themselves into stories they did not live. A confession without evidence can become another dead end. The unanswered phone call from the supposed kidnappers is one of the quietest and most chilling details. The note created an expectation. Wait, prepare, obey, but the expected call did not come. That absence made the note feel less like a kidnapping tool and more like a symbol of misdirection. But misdirection by whom remains the question. There were also many people investigated, interviewed, compared, and cleared in different ways. Thousands of tips came in. Detectives traveled across states. The case file grew into a mountain. But the mountain did not produce a conviction. In true crime, we often look for the cinematic moment, the hidden clue, the final twist, the shocking reveal. But real cold cases usually move differently. They move through lab reports, databases, interviews, retesting, waiting, and the hope that a technology not available in 1996 might someday make sense of evidence that once seemed too small or too mixed to matter. The basement location also matters. It was not a public street, not a remote field, not a place where a stranger could easily disappear into darkness after leaving a body behind. It was a room inside the home. For many viewers, that fact makes the case feel impossible. For intruder theory supporters, it means the offender was bold, familiar with the space, or hidden long enough to act. This is where modern DNA genealogy enters the conversation. In other cold cases, genetic genealogy has identified suspects decades after crimes occurred. But it requires usable DNA, legal permission, proper chain of custody, and a profile strong enough to compare. The Boulder case has DNA, but whether it can produce the kind of profile needed for a decisive breakthrough is a question only investigators and forensic experts can answer responsibly. The human side of the case remains painful. JonBenét would be an adult today. Instead, her name is frozen at age 6. Her childhood pageant images became part of a national conversation she never consented to join. Her family lived under suspicion and grief. Investigators lived under criticism. The public lived with a question it could not stop asking. Over time, the case became less about one night and more about the failure to resolve one night. That is the defining quality of a cold case. The original event is frozen, but the consequences keep moving. New technology, new interviews, new documentaries, new accusations, new grief. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? There are 3 broad possibilities people still debate. The first is that someone inside the home was involved, and the note was staged. The second is that an intruder entered the home, committed the crime, and left evidence that was missed or misunderstood. The third is that the truth contains elements that do not fit neatly into either camp. Mistakes, contamination, panic, partial evidence, and human behavior under extreme stress. The 2025 investigative update matters because it shows the case is not abandoned. New interviews, re-interviews, new evidence collection, and retesting mean investigators still believe movement is possible. Even so, official caution remains necessary. A lead is not a solution. A test is not a conviction. A theory is not a verdict. The strongest storytelling mistake in this case is pretending it is simple. It is not simple. If it were simple, the case would not still be open after nearly 3 decades. So let us return to the beginning. A family came home from Christmas celebrations. A little girl was put to bed. Before dawn, a mother found a ransom note. Police arrived. Friends gathered. Hours later, the little girl was found in the basement. The ransom note had not led to a kidnapper. The house had become the scene. And from that moment on, every answer seemed to fracture into doubt. If a breakthrough comes, it may not look dramatic at first. It may begin with a partial profile, a family tree, a lab report, a name cross-checked against travel, employment, proximity, or past behavior. Cold cases often open not with thunder, but with a quiet match in a database. The note asked for money, but the case demanded something much harder: certainty. The public wanted a villain. The media wanted a storyline. The family wanted their daughter's killer found. Police wanted a case they could prove, but the evidence resisted the clean ending everyone craved. But if no breakthrough comes, JonBenét's story still teaches creators, investigators, and viewers something vital. It teaches us that the dignity of the victim must outlast the curiosity of the crowd. It teaches us that a case can be famous and still misunderstood. And it teaches us that justice requires more than confidence, it requires proof. If there is one takeaway from the JonBenét Ramsey case, it is this: the first hours matter. Protect the scene, limit access, document everything, follow every theory, but marry none too early. Treat victims with dignity, treat suspects as suspects, not monsters before proof, and never confuse public pressure with justice. As of today, the case remains open. Boulder Police continue to encourage anyone with information to come forward. The hope is that DNA testing, renewed interviews, or a tip from someone who has stayed silent for too long may finally unlock the vault. So as we close this vault for now, remember the most important fact is not the note, not the theories, not the mansion, not the pageants, and not the media frenzy. The most important fact is that a 6-year-old child was killed. And the truth still matters. And perhaps someday, the story will no longer end with a question. Until then, JonBenét Ramsey's case remains one of America's most haunting unsolved murders, a Christmas night mystery. A ransom note that still feels impossible, a basement discovery that shattered a family, and an investigation that became a mirror reflecting media obsession, forensic limits, and the fragile difference between suspicion and proof. If this episode gave you a clearer, more respectful look at the case, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Cold Case Vault. Tell us in the comments which clue you believe deserves the most attention today: the ransom note, the unknown DNA, the basement window, or the early crime scene response. Thank you for watching Cold Case Vault, where we reopen the files that went cold. Because someone, somewhere, knows something. Subscribe, stay curious, and help us unlock the vault.